to the show. Man, am I excited for this next one. We are so lucky to have this next guest on with us. He's a history teacher here at the high school. And he's probably a guy who takes his teaching job the most serious here. He's very well respected here. He's been here for a long time and he has a lot of history here. He has his own band, the Jospeh Band, which will be performing with us at the end of the show, so we're very excited for that. Here he is, Mr. Joe Brucato. How you doing, Jospeh?
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
I'm so excited for you to be here. You are just, you have a lot of history here at Milford High. All the kids love you and everything. You're just really respected here, so I'm really glad that you.
I'm flattered to hear that. Thank you.
So, you know, a lot of kids know a lot about you here, but we really don't know much about your childhood. Where did you grow up here?
I grew up in Milford on Rosenfeld Ave, which is right off Fountain Street. Just a hop, skip, and a jump from the tank down in the corner here. So you could probably walk down to Rosenfeld Ave, where I grew up, from here in about 6 or 7 minutes you'd make it there. So I grew up right here. This was all woods when I was a little kid, okay?
So you went to Stacy then?
I went to Memorial School first, and then I went to Stacy. Well, the building that now houses the auditorium there was Stacy Junior High School, which was 7th and 8th grade. Okay. And then the big building that houses the Middle School West, was where I went to high school.
Oh, really? Okay. Now, do you remember any history teachers that you had there?
Well, Mr. Andriola, Bob Andriola, who I work with in the social studies department at Milford High School, he retired about 6 or 7 years ago. He was at Milford High School my senior year. Another lady that was my class advisor, who's also retired 6, 7 years ago, that was at Milford High School was Mrs. Sweeney. Her name at the time was Mrs. Doherty, and she was a fine English teacher, and I remember her, and I got to work with her. Mrs. Brennan, Eve Marie Brennan, whose name was Miss Visconti at the time, she was a teacher of mine, and once again, I got to work with her as a colleague at Milford High School. Some of the others have either gone on and they're retired, or you know, they were probably in their 40s, and that was 40 years ago, so either they're very elderly or they're deceased.
All right. So where'd you go to college from? You left high school, where'd you go to college?
I graduated from Milford High School. I went to Holy Cross College in Worcester, and I graduated in 1975. And then I didn't get my master's till later on. I graduated in 1988 with a master's in education from Worcester State College, and I've taken a number of other courses like towards certification, or just to get a step raise, or just to keep myself fresh in the ball game.
So when did you begin your career at Milford High School?
I began Milford High School in 1981. That's an interesting story. I started teaching in 1976 at the Milford Middle School.
Really?
And Stacy School was called then. And it was 6th, 7th, and 8th. And I pretty much was 7th grade teacher. And they had a cluster system then where they had different groupings. They had the white cluster, a red cluster, and a blue cluster. The white kids might have been chorus kids. The blues might have been like in the orchestra and so forth, and then the other group might have been just miscellaneous. And I started off with a number of good teachers who helped really inspire me in the middle school. A number of them have retired once again. And then there was a thing called Proposition 2.5, where there were some massive cutbacks in the state in education and in town. And I landed up here at the high school, and I dreaded it, and I really didn't like it the first couple of years because I was trained to be a 7th grade instructor, and I taught reading. After
reading?
Reading,
You,
yeah,
you,
that's
you weren't even a history teacher.
no, and that
Wow.
was my major in college. But finally, after a couple of years, getting experience on the high school level with older kids, I found that not only did I enjoy it, but I look forward toward coming in every day.
Mhm.
And then I finally got to teach what my major was, history, and that's it. 35 years in teaching, 30 years done at Milford High School. And I really don't see an end in sight. God willing, hopefully I can go another 4 or 5 years. A lot of people my age, 57, 58 years old, are retiring.
Right.
But I'm just, I'm having fun doing what I'm doing. I like the kids.
You obviously do. Now, I sat in on your band practice the other day.
Yep.
You seem just so you're just so enthusiastic about music and everything. When did this love for music come from?
That's a good question. I've loved music ever since the Beatles invasion. When the Beatles came off the plane in New York City, I believe it was 1963,
Right.
with their Beatles-style haircut, a bob cut, or whatever you want to call it, just totally won me over. The Ed Sullivan Show, which played every Sunday evening, I believe it was 7 o'clock. It was a variety show. I saw the Beatles live, and that was it. Now, I was born in 1954, so I was only 8 or 9 years old. But I was still so awestruck by the music scene and how potent they were and the energy that they had, that even though I was not a musician,
Mm-hmm.
I just fell in love with the music. And then after the Beatles, a number of other bands came over. The Kinks, the Rolling Stones, you can go on and on.
Mhm.
Chad and Jeremy, so many other bands, The Who. They would just roll off my tongue. If I were to name them all, it would take me 10 minutes.
Right.
And I just loved it, the style, the sound of the music. And I didn't pick a guitar up until I was like a senior in college.
A senior in college?
A senior in college that was 19 years old or 20 years old. A friend of mine had picked up some guitar chords, and he showed me an E minor and a G, and I practiced, and I enjoyed it, and that was it. I've never really put it down since then. That was like close to 40 years ago.
Now, did you take lessons or did you teach yourself? Because I know a lot of musicians actually taught themselves.
I taught myself.
chords
What
and
I did was I bought a book of chords, and I just memorized the chords, all the majors, all the minors, and I learned all the different positions on the neck, seventh chords, minor sevenths, ninths, major sevenths, and I was always a rhythm guitar player.
All right.
I always liked to watch John Lennon, the way he strummed the guitar,
Right.
and I always considered myself a rhythm player. And it's odd. I really didn't want to learn too much about lead soloing until maybe about 10 years getting into it. I took a few lessons with a classmate of mine who was a phenomenal musician, David Stadig, who I graduated with in 1971 from high school. And he gave me a lot of lessons on scales and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny the way it is, I just kind of taught myself. As I look back on it, I would have had a tremendous advantage if I took lessons more seriously and I learned to read music, because then I would have been able to translate it a lot easier in terms of key changes and the whole dynamic behind the guitar. But now, I was telling my wife the other day, I've learned a lot more about lead soloing and scales. You don't really need to take lessons anymore.
Yeah.
Because everything you want is on YouTube. All you have to do is look up a song. Let's say, for instance, we're doing a song, The Boys Are Back in Town by Thin Lizzy.
Yeah, you got to perform that for us
right,
later on.
late 70s. I wanted to learn those lead riffs in that, so I just punched in on the computer, Thin Lizzy, The Boys Are Back in Town, guitar solo. And there's like a dozen of them that come up, and you watch these guys giving lessons right through the computer, and they slow it down, they give you the tab and everything. And hopefully, although I think already it's taken a lot of business away from guitar instructors, because hopefully they won't become obsolete because they have to earn a living. But I have learned a lot from that. And I mean, anything you want, bass guitar, you know, drum soloing, it's all there. It's at our fingertips.
Now, there's a really interesting picture in the room that I think might have a good story behind it. There's a picture in your room of you and Steven Tyler. We know them from Aerosmith.
Right.
Kids in school probably say, "Oh, the guy from American Idol."
Right.
How did you meet him?
Okay, that was absolutely one of the greatest thrills of my life, having met him and the bass player, Tommy Hamilton. Well, in that picture, there's me, there's Steve Tyler, and there's another guy. The other guy happens to be my cousin, Michael Verge. And Michael was an employee of Steve Tyler. He was like his personal assistant. And he did all these errands and all kinds of other stuff, valeting, doing, I don't know, I hate to use the word, but grunt work, you know, like foot soldier work, going out. If Steve wanted a pizza at 3 a.m., he'd call up Mike. Mike will have to deliver him the pizza, okay? If he needed a CD, no matter how rare it was, Mike would have to go out, find it, get it for him. So he was like his assistant, but it got to the point where Steve just drove him bananas because